So welcome everyone. This is January 7th, and it's we're dedicating this day to David Bowie. It's a good way to start out the year. I'm in Lexington here, and most of us are all spread around Billerica and other places. We're in the middle of a beautiful New England snowstorm, and not too dangerous a one, it seems, and that's generally lovely. Today's service is about Bowie. A little bit lighter note. I put on something sparkly and put off a robe. I brought my robe home, and then I realized Bowie doesn't have a robe unless it would be like purple and sparkly. So a clergy robe is not the right theme for a Bowie service. So here's my confession. I was a little too young to remember Starman or Ziggy Stardust when he first landed and struck people's consciousness. I was born in 1967. 20 years younger than him, of our icon of openness and transformation. But to blame my not getting Bowie as a kid is sort of disingenuous. It was kind of more of a culture gap. I've never really been a huge Bowie fan. That's probably for some version of a cultural location that prompted this entire service. I didn't need to look to Bowie for inspiration. I grew up straight, white, cisgendered guy. My sexuality was more shaped by finding Playboys in the woods with ratty edges on them than it was by needing to explore any other avenues of life. So I had that silent privilege of normal, which now has normal as being taken to sort of describe people who are not neurodivergent. So I'm starting this with a little bit of a confession that sort of Bowie prompts me to accept diversity more. I think of him as an icon of that. So this service is a little bit about me, but it's mostly about Bowie and a tribute to him. I wrote it kind of as a eulogy to him when he died not too many years ago. So there is that, and I'm going to light our chalice. So this is time for our story for all ages, our children's moment, as you'd say. And so if anyone's listening, I can't really see everybody at this point, but that's fine. I hope there's some children on or young people on. So I want to deliver a children's moment that I should have heard when I was growing up in the Episcopal Church, a quarter mile from where I sit right now. And this would have been helpful to a lot of kids, and it would have been helpful to a lot of kids to me. So we would normally get in the Episcopal Church, sermons about the 10 Commandments, which I think you can see there. And stories about Jesus, and all that's wonderful. But here's what I would have loved to see. I would have loved to see the pastor come out and say that there should have been one more commandment. There should have been an 11th commandment that fell off the stone that Moses had carried down from Mount Sinai. This is my version of that. It says, be careful about how you approach what you think is strange. That caution, that 11th commandment would have been incredibly helpful for all of Christendom. Can you imagine what if the 11th commandment would have been something just like this? We would all be so much healthier and happier. Thousands of people certainly would, millions of people certainly would have been. And this history of Christianity would have been part of its true fulfillment of the justice and the compassion that was brought. So I would want to instruct the kid that I was sitting there being when I was a little kid in church, or even a young kid in church, to remember that there really is no normal, right? There's more to the center. There's always most things funnel on a bell curve, but normal in Africa may be not to be wearing sneakers or sneakers without laces. People in different parts of the world eat different foods. Many of us are born with different sizes and skin colors, all old news to you, but not old news necessarily to me as a kid. So that's the message. And you guys get it all the time. It's one of the chief messages of our church. But my message to the kid that I was back in the day, was to be careful for imposing your view of normal on others, because there really isn't such a thing. The way that you see the world the way we all see the world does not fit for everyone. And it's very difficult to fight that. Moral development has to extend beyond your general instinct to see the world as you see it and broaden that out to expand the world, to allow other people to have their voices. There we go. I, so before I begin in the sermon, I'd like to say the exercise was healing in a way, enlightening too. If I was trying to put words to the wordless sensibility of the way I viewed Bowie as a teen, which I never gave him too much thought, it was that Bowie seemed a little needy, unnecessarily fancy. There was something forced about his eccentricity as I saw it. I got that he was a rock god, and I would never have removed him from the pantheon of rock gods, but I don't think I really knew why. Almost until I became a UU, I didn't really get what people got out of his presence. And I didn't, and so there we are. So as I confessed in the intro, I was a little too conservative to be a Bowie fan, and I was never that conservative. And lack of sacred memories of listening to him are not really etched into my history, although he was obvious on all the rock stations I listened to as a kid. I never thought Bowie is too weird to not sing along to Changes or the beautifully haunting Ground Control to Major Tom. I always loved his simplistic rhythm of Under Pressure, probably my favorite Bowie song. And always thought the little drummer boy he did with Bing Crosby was touching. And would have loved to have been in a fly in the room when he co-wrote Fame with John Lennon, which I had not known that. So I like Bowie enough. But to stand here and confess that Bowie was a little weird and unnecessary to my teenage self, to not share that would be deceitful in a sermon. I don't feel that way anymore. I get it now. Bowie didn't make me a Bowie fan. Becoming a UU did, really. Becoming a UU changed my values. It made me turn to face the strange, as Bowie sang. Bowie has an embodied gospel of values that are fundamentally spiritual, and particularly our way. I didn't see that then, but I do now. And writing this sermon kind of won me over. Bowie died January 10th, 2016, not many years ago, at the age of 69 from liver cancer. He was born in the un-Bowie-like obscurity on January 8th, tomorrow, in birthday terms, 1947, to a middle-class couple in London. His dad worked for a charity. His mom was a waitress in a theater. As a child, he was described as precocious, single-minded, talented, artistic. He also liked to fight. And it was a fight that almost permanently damaged one of his eyes, which you can almost pick up if you look at him at his pictures. So take a look at Bowie pictures. You can see that he got punched in the eye when he was a kid. Like most of the young Brits of his generation, which is sort of quirky to most Americans, they don't really get this. He started listening to American rhythm and blues, essentially black music, which was revelatory to him. When our young hero of this sermon heard Little Richard's Tutti Frutti, he exclaimed that he had heard God. In short order, he began mimicking the moves of Elvis Presley, with whom he celebrates a birthday, and began to really play music. His first instrument was, like many people, a recorder. By the time he graduated from high school, he could play the ukulele, the bass, and the piano. But we passed on college probably feeling that it would interfere with his already sharp learning curve. Bowie's bright and curious. And on his own, he started exploring jazz. He began playing the alto saxophone, like nearly everyone who ever became a rock god. Before he transcended into music and movie stardom in his early 20s, our saint of personal transformation played in a lot of different bands. Unlike hardly any rock star, though, he studied mime. He took dance lessons and was trained in avant-garde theater. A lot, not that he lost any of that skill. I would say he paid attention, obviously, and he learned relentlessly. He digested new music and art almost maniacally his entire life. I hadn't known that. For all his flamboyance, Bowie was determined and talented. Hindsight aside, it's impossible to not think that Bowie would eventually become a star when you hear his story. But circumstance always has a vote in how we turn out. It's one of the wonderful things about our faith is that we acknowledge the randomness of life. And listening to his story, because 5 days before Apollo 11 rocket launched on July 11th, 1969, Bowie released his space oriented single, Space Oddity. The mix of Bowie's imagination, talent, and public excited about the stars pushed his album into the UK top 10. Bowie followed up Space Oddity with perhaps the most famous of his characters, Ziggy Stardust. Like so many kids who wander around the lunchroom wondering where they fit, like Sarah just confessed, Ziggy came to Earth with his fellow band of spiders from Mars to find himself, and his characters became a metaphor. Especially early in his career, Bowie captured the zeitgeist of a population growing a little bit tired of the hippie movement and tapped the nerve of a generation of people both earnest and angst filled around their identity issues. However, as curious and enduring as Bowie was, Bowie reminded the surprised NPR Terry Gross, the host of Fresh Air, that he was Ziggy Stardust for only 18 months of his roughly 50-year career. I had lost that. That's the most enduring image for me. As one critic suggested, Bowie took the earthly elements of rock and roll that threatened to become mundane, and with a flair of the mythic, Bowie sought the cosmic. As Reverend Lisa Ann Gundlach, the UU minister, said in The World 2 years ago, Bowie's lyrics soared with his ambition for transformation. The thing that differentiated Bowie from other successful musicians who find their niche and master it is that David Bowie never stopped reiterating himself all the time, a classic you kind of transformative instinct. In truth, he mutated faster and more impatiently than even his audience was ready for. He did so because he never cared about fame enough to really catch up to his creative journey. He was relentless, even reckless in his personal evolution as an artist, almost never letting something sit long enough to have all its traction and waste all of its energy before it moved on. In rough order, Bowie famously dropped in and out of the following styles of music: rock, glam, plastic soul, British jungle, industrial, krautrock, pop, and electronic. His last album, Black Star, released 2 days before he died, used jazz musicians and is as weird as anything he did in his 20s. I never would have guessed this, but Bowie always saw himself as more of a creator than he was a performer, and said that he never really liked to tour because he was more interested in the creative phase of developing new stuff, an album or a new musical style, than reproducing it night after night. He also had stage fright. His natural fear and insecurity were a major reason why he often so presented himself in some kind of form of character. Although Bowie was first and perhaps always a singer, songwriter, musician, Rolling Stone did, after all, describe him as the best rock star of all time. High praise from Rolling Stone, right? Rolling Stone praised him as the best rock star of all time. And when you think about it, he might just be that. Bowie parlayed his music into nearly an equally long acting career. Bowie performed in stage productions of The Elephant Man and was in Lazarus, an off-Broadway musical of a sequel. And he did a sequel to his 1976 role in the film The Man Who Fell to Earth. Offstage, but on screen, he also convincingly played a Goblin King, and Nikola Tesla, for whom the car is named. He did a lot. For those who are gathered here, he played in The Last Temptation of Christ. He played a convincing Pontius Pilate. You think of him playing that role pretty well. So he had amazing range across a lot of chosen disciplines, and even within them. Here's some accolades for those of us who are Bowie fans. First of all, Bowie is one of those kind of elite class of artists that can just go by a singular name. Elvis, Sinatra, Madonna, Prince, who became culturally significant enough to be identified by a single word. That's a rare club. Only halfway through his career, Bowie was both enshrined in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and achieved a star on Hollywood's Walk of Fame. Having never penned a novel, he's in the Science Fiction Hall of Fame for stretching everyone's imaginations, and he recently received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Grammys. He is obviously the subject of a David Bowie Is exhibit that toured many museums. The guy whose music and persona who we have said was really not my thing early on was offered the opportunity to become a British knight. He turned it down because he said to the Queen, "It's not my kind of thing." He presently ranked 29th on the esteemed list of the greatest Brits of all time. Now, I'm more of a Jerry Garcia guy than a Bowie one, but Bowie's clearly a legend. The LA Transgender Chorus annually performs The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars album in full. That must be something to see. I should have seen it when I was there. Bowie has recently had an asteroid belt and a newly discovered species of spider named after him as well. No joke. 6 of Rolling Stone's top 500 albums of all time come from him. 6 of the 500 top rock and roll albums voted of all time come from him. And he was named by that magazine, again, the most important rock star ever. The British paper The Guardian called him the most important musician since the Beatles. His song Heroes was credited by Germany's government in an audience that finally helped bring down the Berlin Wall. I'm certainly not the most deserving person to sit here and tell you this, but Bowie matters. Given its driving, almost compulsive penchant for evolution, it's probably appropriate that he didn't even start out as David Bowie. Bowie's given name was David Jones, and for all his instinct to innovate, even mutate, he had every intention to stick with his given name until the Monkees and their baby-faced lead singer, Davy Jones, got famous before he did. Famously saying publicly, "No one's going to make a monkey out of me," the real Davy Jones proceeded to then formally change his name to Tom Jones until Tom Jones, which is not even the musician, the singer Tom Jones's real name, released the hit "It's Not Unusual" and stole that option away from David Bowie. So our David ended up settling on his original first name and the famous Texas pioneer Jim Bowie's last name. In perhaps the greatest irony of all time, before David forever made Bowie mean a poignant, flamboyant, bisexual musician, Bowie was a hunting knife. No longer. Interestingly, the man identifiable by primitively two-syllable name was the same person who transformed himself so many times that he joked that he nearly forgotten that he originally began his career as an overweight Korean woman. However, for all his characters and creation, for all his music and his movies, to this unworthy officiant to tell his story, one thing stands out. Not sure why this is so touching. Mention his name to anyone between the ages of 40 and 80, and they know who Bowie is and what he meant. Bowie's gospel and his followers are about spreading innovation, exploration, creativity, and transformation. Bowie means freak chic. Yeah, I wouldn't ever have, as a young person, desired to be as courageous to put on a dress or paint a lightning bolt on my head. But that's not the point. For some, he was an angel. He gave an entire generation of thoughtful outsiders, the kids who would frequently sit alone in the school lunchroom, an icon of cool to hold on to. Listening to the man describe himself or simply viewing his career arc from a distance, it becomes clear that at the time he had created a persona or a piece of music, often both of them linked, he was on to something new. Does that sound familiar to Unitarian Universalism? We just talked about that yesterday in theology. Maybe to you, perhaps, too. What made the man we honor today so fit to essentially eulogize in a UU sermon is that Bowie had the same impatience with his craft we have with the stuffy reluctance of religion. Meredith mentioned this a lot yesterday. He really could be our tiny denomination's patron saint. Not a bad idea for us. It would be an interesting move. August Peterson, who was the RE director at the UU Church in Williamsburg, Virginia, said this. The first time I saw Bowie in a movie, I was 12 or 13 in the grips of major family illness and had a little sense of how to deal with it. Let's face it, existence itself I was struggling with. Bowie's performance as Thomas Jerome Newton as the man who fell to earth absolutely blew my mind. How could a man who won my heart as Ziggy Stardust also be this naked alien hopping around, reminding me of Dorian Gray? Bowie made me feel so much less alone and so much happier than I ever would have been without his existing, said August Peterson. I miss knowing he's on the planet. He was my minister of strange, my muse of alienation, and made looking like an androgynous alien look classy, fun, and attainable. Bowie made my life richer and deeper. There's others. Elaine McCardle in the spring of 2017 UU World article titled Bowie, Prince, and Cohen, Saints of Freedom. Yeah. And I lost my spot there. Hold on. Where did I go? Said, we needed you. You drew the circle a little wider. And I think that's absolutely true. Amen. Tribute to David Bowie a few years too late. Amen.